a technical challenge. So the panel is going to take it upon themselves to semi-shout throughout this session. We hope that those of you online can hear what we are saying. And we're coming to you from the green zone at COP27. The green zone is quite far away from the blue zone, so we are really hoping that those who are joining online can hear us. My name is Antonia. I'm the Director of Research, Policy and Advocacy at Education International, which is the global federation of teacher unions. And over the past year, we've been leading a campaign around quality climate change education. And what we want to do today is have a conversation about what quality climate education is and how we can get there. So a demand for universal quality climate change education alongside our demands for climate action, decarbonization, climate finance, and a just transition. We have a distinguished panel with which we are going to take on the big question around quality climate change education. So with me here, I have Jenny Cooper, who's a teacher representative with the National Education Union in the UK. We have a student representative, and I should probably start by acknowledging that Saher couldn't be here with us today, but we're very pleased to have Maria Serra Olivella with us instead. She's a student. She's also one of the co-founders of Fridays for Future in Barcelona. And then online, we have Peter Wallet, who's speaking to us from UNESCO Paris. He's working with the Teacher Task Force. And we are super pleased to have you, Peter. You may also be the only panelist that is very, very well prepared in this session. So that might be an advantage of joining online. So what we're going to do is look at a couple of different aspects of quality. My wish is for us to start with the question of what quality is in terms of the content and the pedagogy, then move on to the inputs, the things that we need to have in place for quality climate change education to be possible, and then lastly look at the impacts and the disruption that quality climate change education brings about. So let's get started looking at what really constitutes a quality climate change education. What does it mean in terms of the content, what is being taught, and what does it mean in terms of pedagogy and pedagogical approaches? Could we start with you, Jen?
Okay, happy to start with me, but I think I might intend to start with what quality climate education should be or doesn't look like, because sometimes it seems easier to make a list that way. But first of all, I think as a teacher, and as a teacher who, along with many other teachers around the world, probably has kind of spent their career being told to do very prescribed things in very prescribed ways that don't necessarily feel right, including morally right, for the children that we teach. My first answer would be it depends who it's for, where it is, the context in which you're teaching, who you're teaching, but also who the teacher is. But obviously, I mean, this links in with the quality bit, but it depends what you have available as well. But I'm sure we're coming to that later. So I feel privileged to have spent yesterday morning with some of the Indigenous people who were here at COP27 speaking about their rights or the threat to their rights. And one of the people that we heard from yesterday from the Congo Basin, he keeps coming back to me the words she said. I can't speak my language anymore, and I can't dance my dance. And Jen was nodding in the audience because she was there as well. And I was actually moved to tears and couldn't. It really got to me, that did. And I think the reason it got to me is because I could relate to it so well, because so many of us have had similar battles with education, whether you're a child or a parent or a teacher. There is so much wrong with our education system at the moment. Not everywhere, but in a lot of places and in a lot of contexts. Teachers are being asked to teach things that don't prepare their children for the future or don't suit them for the context that they're living in. Parents are trying to defend their children who feel that education is not meeting their child's individual needs. And students all around the world are crying out for education about the climate and education that will prepare them for the future jobs that if we do this properly, we would have in a green economy. And those things don't appear to be being addressed. The Indigenous young people that spoke to us yesterday were saying things like, education is what you eat. Education is the music you hear that your grandparents taught you, didn't teach you from a book or from any formal system, but they handed it down. And education is what you eat, and education is what you cook and what you grow. And to me, right across the world, not just in Indigenous territories, I feel that we need to have that ambitious vision for a really positive new look at education, that it's less formalised from how it is in so many, particularly countries in the global north at the moment, and that we need to be thinking of education in a holistic way. And also, finally, I feel that our children need experiences of nature, and that needs to be central to the curriculum, because unless our children are experiencing nature and are steeped in nature, how will they know what it is they need to protect?
Wonderful. What do you say to that? What's the kind of student reaction to that?
First of all, I'll say that it is a relief, I think, for most students to hear that the frustration that they hear is shared by the teachers. I think it's refreshing in a way that we usually find more of a wall when we try to speak to, hey, I would like better education. Then, yeah, me too, let's figure it out together. So that discussion that was refreshing, and I agree with all of what you said. I wanted to start with maybe a personal story, because one of the special things of my generation, 20 years old now, is that we were taught about climate change. I was told in primary school that climate change existed, but not probably in the way that I would want it, or that most of my generation feel now that it is climate change. I was taught that it was a problem, and I distinctly remember the image of a polar bear that was homeless, and there was no saying of how that would ever affect me. It was hardcore science that affected the polar bear that I've never met, although they're adorable, are very, very far away from me. So I want to start saying that if I now look back into it, I would think that climate education is first and foremost intersectional. We cannot only teach the science. The science is crucial and must be taught to understand what you're talking about. But it is so important to understand how we got here. We cannot solve a problem without understanding how we got there in the first place. And that has nothing to do with science. That is how we as humans interact with each other. And there's so much impact in teaching that to kids, I think. That is also profound revolutionary. Like the moment you teach kids that societies work in a way that they destroy what they're supposed to protect, there's so much power in that. I also want to say that in the approach we take, I feel that there is a conversation to be had on how do we take care of the kids that we're talking to. Because, I mean, at least for my generation, that we found out about like how climate change was from an IPCC report, which is traumatizing and a lot of degrees. We're teaching these kids about very scary things at a very young age. And there needs to be a kindness in how we do it and a following up to how we do it. A lot of things that I miss because I do a lot of work on going to schools and explaining climate change to kids. And one thing that I regret a lot about how I work is that I'm not able to go there the next day and ask how they are because they're not my kids that I teach. And I fear that I go there and explain so many things to them that are probably very scary to hear. And the next day, no one asks how they are. And I don't know to what extent it is fair to present to them the data without the proper care under it. I also want to say that we must, for me, quality climate education must be resilience. There's no way that we're doing a great job if the kids that we're teaching can, like, do Google Docs, but cannot plant a tomato, cannot plant a tree, are totally unconnected to the land. So it must be resilience and empower kids not only to climate action, but to return it to nature. So that's all for how I see it.
Great. So a strong call for a climate change education that cuts across subjects and one that doesn't shy away from the shocking, the difficult, the challenging, but also finds a way of taking care and really maybe something collective. And I'm wondering, Jenny mentioned nature, but I'm wondering if also resistance and the experience of taking action together, if that isn't an element that can bring in some of that hope. And I want to bring in Peter into the conversation, and I hope you caught enough of the conversation to not feel too uncomfortable to now be pulled into it. How would you define quality climate change education?
Thank you very much. I'm understanding a little bit. The audio is still a little bit difficult though. But I would like to say though that we know that
Peter, we have a challenge now, but because ironically we cannot hear you at all. So hold for just a little while and we look into it.
Is this possible? No, he just muted himself. He wasn't muted before.
Can you unmute, Peter?
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we cannot hear you.
That was working.
Yeah, exactly.
أجرب حاجة تانية، أجرب إن إحنا نسمعه ممكن.
ممكن اقفل وارجعه تاني أكنسل. اخر حاجة. كده يكون سمعنا.
هو سامعني، إحنا مش سامعين.
كل سامعينه دلوقتي.
مرة واحدة مش سامعين.
بس يعني عامل ستوب ريكورد وارجعه.
ألو. طيب ثانية واحدة. طب إيه، أجرب حاجة. أنت جرب كده حاجة؟ لا استنى أجرب حاجة. لا مش. طب رجعت تاني سكرين بس عشان أجرب اللي يقول لي عليه.
بس انا عايز
كان في طريقة ثانية واحدة. ممكن can you ask him to talk?
Can we try again, teacher?
Can you hear me now?
Just a sec. Okay, so they hear him on Zoom, we can't hear him. Okay, now.
And now?
Do you hear me now?
They can use it over Zoom, they're here.
Sorry about this. Zoom, you can be heard. It's just here in the room that we can't hear. Can we try again? Sorry, Peter.
Can you hear me now?
One last time, Peter.
How about now?
لا مش شغالة يا باشمهندس، جربت كل حاجة في السبيكر مرة واحدة مش شغالة. اللي هو بتاع الريلتك اوديو ده. مرة واحدة. هو كان شغال ومرة واحدة مبقاش شغال، مرة واحدة.
Can we use your phone to hear him if he's heard on Zoom?
Have you tried?
No, why not?
Maybe try now.
Can you hear me now?
Same problem. I tried the three. I tried this too.
You tried this too already? Okay.
I tried all of three. It was working on this one perfectly fine. I don't know what happened. They can hear him. It's just the problem is with this.
Can we use your phone somehow and put the microphone next to your phone?
كده المشكلة من عنده هو. طالما احنا مش سامعين المشكلة مش
اللي على زوم سامعينه، المشكلة عندنا احنا. يعني هو على زوم سامعه عادي. المشكلة مش عند الراجل. معلش نخلص.
Teacher, can you try again?
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you from a phone room,
But I have to unmute myself when he's talking.
How about now?
Yeah, so if you
Sorry, I was having trouble a bit hearing you as well. Although, sorry, my name is Peter Wallet, and I'm with the Teacher Task Force, so based in Paris with UNESCO. So thank you very much for this opportunity to speak. I agree with all the points I've heard, so I don't want to repeat some of the things that I've heard. Although probably I would like to say, sorry, should I continue? I heard feedback. Should I continue?
Yes, yes, please do. We've solved the problem.
Okay, good. Okay, so we know that education policymakers need to address climate change education more and more. Scientific data continues to document its long-term effects, as well for its past and potential impacts on human lives, living standards, poverty, migration, and conflict. Of course, beyond just definitions and facts and declarative information, we know that quality climate change it needs to include an investigative approach to climate change science. It needs to foster students to become critical thinkers, critical observers, and to develop a social conscience for inclusive and sustainable societies. It also needs to be context and regional specific and provide students with knowledge, tools, and again, a spirit of inquiry to better understand and co-develop responses to this problematic phenomenon. Curricula need to be transformed. They need to include key areas where UNESCO plays a key role in global advocacy. This includes global citizenship education, education for sustainable development. Given their complex and interdisciplinary nature, these areas need to be extended comprehensively across educational levels, grades, subjects, using whole school approaches, and where possible, also within broader community contexts and settings. It needs to tap into 3 learning dimensions, including cognitive, socio-emotional, and action-oriented perspectives for climate change education. So it should not just provide facts and scientific understanding, but should connect this with human life and environmental impacts at home and abroad. It needs to lead to concrete behavioral change that has lifelong impacts to ensure sustainable living in harmony with one another and with the environment. However, climate change education requires trained and qualified teachers. We know that globally, just 85% of primary and secondary teachers around the world hold minimum required qualifications, and therefore many are not prepared based on national standards to provide quality education. This drops down in sub-Saharan Africa, where just 69% of primary teachers, 6% of teachers at the secondary level have minimum required qualifications. Therefore, we know that there's lack of subject matter knowledge, appropriate pedagogical skills. A recent UNESCO EI report shows that, even though 95% of teachers understand it's important to teach about the severity of climate change, only 42% were confident to do this. They were even less confident when it regards to what is about teaching around sustainable consumption and production, which is necessary for climate change science. Key pedagogies, of course, need to be student-centered, inclusive, gender-responsive approaches are required, and they need to be interdisciplinary and project-based, collaborative learning that engage with the environment and communities. Ultimately, students are best served by practices that connect them with real-life situations through their own experiences that are inclusive in nature and require cooperation and common approaches through negotiation and discussion based on evidence around climate change science. So thank you.
That's great. Thanks so much, Peter. And there's a lot of commonalities across the answers, across the reflections. Peter talked about inquiry and that as a source of learning and a way of organizing the learning. Peter also talked about action-oriented quality climate change education. That was something that came true in both Maria and Denny's answers as well. And then you talked about, well, what I heard was a reflection around professional autonomy, teachers having the space, the freedom to make the decisions in their classrooms. And it's interesting, Peter was drawing upon research we've done jointly with UNESCO that shows the very, very high levels of motivation and a very, very low proportion of teachers feeling that they have the tools that they need. There were also findings around the limited and increasingly limited space for teachers to teach about climate change. And Peter mentioned sustainable production and consumption as an area that is perceived as even trickier. And in my mind, there's something interesting there in sustainable production and consumption, taking us straight into the challenges with the economic model of today's capitalist societies and the perceived space of teachers to enter into these areas that are sensitive according to some, controversial according to others. And I'm wondering if we move towards the kind of inputs, the things that we need to allow for quality climate change education to take place. At the EI, we often talk about quality as inputs, processes, and outputs. So there's a conversation around the inputs in, now this microphone stopped working. We are really having technical challenges. So maybe I'm just going to hand over to the panel to their, thank you so much, to their reflections on the things we need. How do we make sure that teachers are prepared, that teachers, students have the tools we need, that the environments we are teaching and learning in are fit for quality climate change education? Then you seem very eager to get started. Go ahead.
Before I forget what I'm going to say. So the thing about teachers' autonomy, yes, teachers need autonomy, but you can only give somebody autonomy when you know they're properly trained and competent to do a job, can't you? So what you said about proper training is the first thing, and then the autonomy comes from that. But of course, we also need children's, students' autonomy, and they need to have a voice in what it is, the direction that teaching goes in as well. There isn't enough equal voice, certainly in my country, in education today. I'm sure that's true elsewhere as well. So we need trained teachers, trained educators. We need, is it still working? Yeah, sorry. Quality resources, but resources includes the resources that are out there, nature, spaces, the environment. And so many of our schools in cities don't have access to that. It might be the school has no outside area at all. There's one school on my patch that has no playground, let alone a tree or any area of green at all. Then maybe the school can access public open spaces, but increasingly public open spaces are being built on and being privatised, and you're being told you can't use that at certain times of the day, it's owned by a private company or whatever, which comes back to the sort of issues that you were raising before. So it's about public funding, but not just public funding for education, but public funding for all the resources that are given that a community can tap into, including that schools can tap into. So time, which you've already mentioned, the weighting of these things on the curriculum, that it's not seen that some subjects have a greater status than others, just because in the past they might have been jobs that led to certain, the subjects that led to certain jobs. Everything should be seen equal. We should have an inclusive curriculum. And time to spend on the things that people want to learn and need to learn for the future society that we're going to have. And then part of resources and funding is about the workforce itself. So, without proper funding, you're not going to have a workforce that feels ownership of what they're doing, that is treated well and feels happy and passionate enough to do their job. And children and young people learn when they're taught by somebody that has a passion for what they're teaching. So number one, you need to properly value your workforce so that that's what you get, and so that you don't end up with situations, sorry to keep going on about the UK, but that we have in the UK at the moment, where people are leaving the teaching profession in droves because they're not being properly valued, they're not being properly paid, and they're not happy with what they're being asked to teach and not teach. So definitely that's a resource, and I've probably gone on long enough. Shall I add on?
Actually, you've done a great job, I think, explaining resources. So I'm gonna let you take notes on that. And I thought while you were speaking, at most of my points. So I will actually do something else, and I would rather explain to you what a great teacher looks like from a student perspective. So I was thinking, and first of all, I see climate change as not only something we need to schools, but a change in paradigms. Everything will change by the time that these kids are 10, 12, 20. So to a degree, you don't only need to take climate to these kids, you need to change the way you teach everything else, which I think is our time. We need this for a while, maybe. We have this great void between reality in the streets and what the kids are being told right now. And climate change is going to make that worse because it separates them with grade. I was actually talking about this before with you. I think my generation is profoundly traumatized by the way we were told the world was going to be when we grow up and what we're going to encounter. I remember distinctly drawing flying cars at some point in my childhood when they told me, what do you imagine your future to be like? And now I think about it, and ironically, that's the least thing that I would want for my future. I would like a safe house, water, and food, and that's about it. So going back to paradigms, we need to teach all teachers from all fields to reinvent what they're teaching in the eyes of climate change, not teach climate change, if that makes sense. I was also thinking that I would like teachers, my dream teacher is kind. And that is because you cannot teach climate change, you cannot teach intersectionality or feminism without kindness. And if you don't, you do not understand what you're teaching. Lastly, I wanted to comment on learning tools because I there's this very funny thing. It's at every IPCC press conference, the scientists go there and they smile on their face. They're like, hey, we made it this time to be accessible for schools, which really every single time I'm like, are you sure? And then I read the thing and I'm like, no, you did not. So we need to create resources for things like the IPCC to be actually accessible because I am passionate about climate. My entire work and dedication is to it, and I do not understand that. So I do not want to think what a 5-year-old at 10 or 12 or someone in high school thinks of the IPCC. I think that's where we're going.
Great, thanks. And then Peter, you in your first intervention, you touched upon some of what's needed, particularly in relation to teachers and the ways in which we can support teachers. But any additional reflections now that you heard both Jenny and Maria as well?
Yeah, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, very well.
Good. I mean, teachers need a lot of things. I mean, the learning materials, they need to be engaging for learners to inspire them to reflect, personalize their own learning to their own location and culture. But materials also need to be available in multiple languages. They need to be available in language of instruction, but also in local languages. Again, they need to move beyond basic facts. They need to include an approach that fosters student inquiry, student-centered and collaborative learning. Teachers need guides to support them. They need material that sort of covers inclusive and gender sensitive approaches. They should include examples of classroom and community-based teaching and learning activities that can be easily implemented in the classroom. So they need sort of practical tools they can use. They also need materials that sort of guide them in terms of the theory around climate change, sustainable development. So they need a number of tools and resources to support them. They also need tools and need approach that sort of also fosters innovation. This can also include digital tools. You know, as the world's common experiences are shifting more digitally and online, accelerated by the COVID-19 and the aftermath of the COVID-19 pandemic. Decreased availability of digital devices and internet in schools is also critical. We know that just 4 in 10 schools globally have computers and internet for teaching and learning. This decreases to only 1 in 4 in Southern Asia, while 1 in 3 schools in Sub-Saharan Africa lacks electricity to support technology integration. So there's a form of, these are other tools that are going to be increasingly called upon. Based on again, the UNESCO EI study, it's titled Teachers Have Their Say, Motivation, Skills and Opportunities to Teach Education for Sustainable Development. They need effective assessment tools. So along with the teaching tools, these need to be developed in systematic and comprehensive manners. They need to respect instructional design principles. They need to be aligned across curriculum and pedagogies. It's rather important also that academic institutions, researchers, and those working in schools of education and teacher training institutions are involved to make the approaches more effective and so they can be developed nationally and locally, and they have a greater impact. They can also be assessed regularly to make sure that they're continuing to maintain and meet the needs. Another way to critically help to ensure broad availability for all students is that it's important to develop new policies around ESD, GECD, climate change. These need to be aligned with other national education policies, teacher policies, sector plans. The Teacher Task Force Teacher Development Guide it's important to help countries develop holistic teacher policies. And we also know that we need to have, again, as mentioned before, better alignment between curriculum, teacher education, pedagogies, and assessment. We also know that there's issues in rural areas where teachers in rural areas are least ready and prepared for teaching around climate change and sustainable development. So extra tools, attention, and care in training interventions and tools and ongoing support and mentoring is important. In-person and also virtual communities, where teachers can share practice and knowledge around practices is quite effective and helps to support teachers in bridging that gap. There's also a need for providing special care for learners with special needs, so their needs are also addressed. The inclusion of assistive devices and making sure that teachers, working in climate change have skills in this area as well. So these are a number. Thank you.
Great. That's a long list, and it's interesting. I was kind of left reflecting on Maria's call for teachers who are kind, and I think there's something interesting in here. Also going back to some of Dennis' reflections around what it's like in many schools today and how little time there is for what we really would want to do and what we know our students would need, what our students are telling us they want. And yet, schools are underfunded and under very, very heavy pressure to deliver according to a very narrowly defined set of key outcomes or core subjects. And there's something very disturbing with the way in which so much in schools today is so competitive as well. And if we are all about challenging a capitalist society, an extractivist approach to our nature, our environment, then surely there's something to be done around that whole notion of competition as well. And I'm going to do something unexpected for our poor panelists, in the sense that I would want to see if there's anyone in the audience here, in the room or online, that would like to share a question, or if it's a reflection, it better be a short reflection, so that we then can come back to the panel for a final round of reflections from their side. Anyone with a burning question? Sifiso? Great, so I see 2 questions. Do we have another microphone, or do we need to? Yes, so there's a microphone at the back that will arrive, and then I will ask you to speak extra super duper loud so that everybody online also hears. We will start with Sifiso and then go to you. Please do mention your name as well afterwards. I don't know, sorry.
Thank you very much. It's not a question, but an addition. I think on the question of policy, what we need also to look at is the issue of the structure of education. In other words, we need to look at the structure of a facilitator. And so if the regulatory framework is set up correctly, we definitely need the correct structure of education, which will obviously respond very positively to innovative strategies. Remembering that the future is now, and therefore, if it is now, it means now must be flexible enough to accommodate the future. Thank you.
Interesting. Thanks, Sifiso, and great.
Hello, my name is Hania. I'm also a youth activist. When I started my kind of activism, I was actually bullied by teachers as well. And so I wanted to ask how you think sort of climate activism and how that can be sort of encouraged in classrooms, and what teachers think, because I did like your point about the time part, because that's something that I'm also been preaching. And it's like, although the kindness is important, it's like, how do we sort of, bring that mindset to teachers, especially when they don't have the resources, they don't have the funding, they don't have the training, if you got it. So, I mean, I want to hear from all of you.
Great. I'm sorry to hear that you had to go through that, and I think that's a great question for us to consider. Who wants to start? Maria, do you want to start this time?
I was thinking when you said, like, how do we encourage climate activism in schools? And my first thought is, how do we encourage anything in schools? Because my experience is that most schools and most teachers want you to be students, and that's it. Your foremost goal is to be a student, and that's your only worry. So my experience, and for what I know, most climate activists' experience, is that we have found way more problems than encouragement from teachers, which is very sad, actually, because they should be encouraging us to do something for the future and preparing us for it. So I think that a more holistic vision of what children and teenagers should be is needed here. They should not only be students, they should be people, they should be passionate, and not every children needs to be a great student. They may be something else greater. So that's what I was thinking first. On how do we encourage kindness? That's a complicated issue, very long ago. I think that to an extent, you're very right to say that once you give the resources and the means for teachers to teach, there's more kindness involved. But there's something here about respect that has, I think is shifting, but that for many, many years, you were just supposed to respect your teacher. When I was 15, I started climate activism, and to I changed my perception from respecting adults to respecting people that respect me back. And that is part of the change. You need to teach children that you earn respect by giving respect, and there's kindness in that. You don't deserve respect just by being a teacher or by being an adult. You deserve respect by the respect that you give back to children. And I think there's kindness in that, and changing the relationship of power and hierarchy that there is in the classrooms might encourage kindness. Or at least I am much more kinder to people that respect me. That might be a change too. You wanna go?
Okay, in no particular order. The bit about kindness. I think if the education system was more inclusive and less based around the competitive stuff that you mentioned earlier, Antonio, I think that would go a long way towards fostering a sort of culture of kindness in the education system. I'm actually a special needs teacher. That's what I do as my day job. You can't kind of do that and not have a sort of culture of kindness in the school. You know, we teach very small groups of children. We're taught to listen to what the child is trying to communicate to us. And our version of climate education is allowing that child to kind of explore nature and things in a very concrete way. I mentioned to somebody earlier that we'll take the children out in our school grounds, which we're lucky to have, to collect conkers from the tree and then use the conkers to make music. And, you know, how can everyone in the room not be happy doing an activity like that? So inclusivity, I think, for kindness. About Sophie's point about the structure of education, I think that's really important, and I think the structure of the training systems for teachers and educators is vitally important as well. So when Peter mentioned earlier about things being in place in teacher training colleges, I mean, sadly in my country, many teachers are no longer trained in a university setting or a teacher training college setting. They're trained on the job. So what they end up doing is just adopting the culture that is already in the school where they're being trained. They don't get to see a range of different cultures and discuss, you know, that inquiry-based learning, which is just as important for teachers as it is for students. On the thing about encouraging climate action amongst students, I was in a Just Transition side event earlier where it was said that workers know that we need to address climate change. They're just scared. They're scared of what might happen. They're scared of what might happen to their jobs. The education version of that is that in many places, teachers are being told you mustn't teach this, or you must, if you teach it in that way, you're instilling radicalism in your students. In the UK, people could be, referred to the Prevent programme, or be sort of put on a disciplinary or whatever for using certain organisations as a resource or encouraging their students into some kind of protest thing. So I represented somebody recently who was at risk of losing his job because he engaged with a student in his class about Palestine, and that's basically banned from the curriculum. So it's fear that's stopping that. And then how can we address it was your final question, was how do we solve it, basically. As teachers, I believe we solve it by coming together collectively through trade union action, but I'm a trade unionist, so I would say that. But as youth activists, we had a little conversation when the sound was down earlier. I think we need to link up more. I think youth organisations linking up with teaching trade unions would be a great thing, because maybe we can solve it together.
Great, and then Peter, all eyes turning towards towards you for a short final reflection.
I'm wondering if you could please just summarize the questions quickly, as I had difficulty hearing them.
So one question being about education systems and how they can be supported to change and change more quickly than they maybe are today. The second one, a reflection around kindness and teachers not always encouraging or being kind about students and their climate activism.
Well, I mean, I think social dialogue is sort of the elephant in the room that's sort of hasn't really been discussed maybe. I mean, social dialogue is a really key ingredient that's going to ultimately lead to positive change within the education system. So, I mean, as we're tackling these new areas where teachers don't necessarily have the skills, where there's a lot of issues around accountability and fear, and I think the social dialogue plays a really important role in this aspect. So teachers and their representatives need to be brought to the table to discuss these issues, to come to better consensus and collective bargaining around these issues, around codes of conduct where there's fear about what is being taught, and just having a better skill set in how to deal with these issues. I mean, in terms of the kindness, I mean, there's a lot of work these days around foundational learning, and that's and integrating also an aspect around psychosocial learning and socio-emotional development and how that's important in children. So we need to upgrade teacher training as well to incorporate these areas, which I think will go a long way in terms of addressing some of these issues. Updating continuing professional development frameworks for teachers that are based on new standards is going to be a critical element. And ultimately, at the end of the day, I mean, I just want to summarize, I guess, by my main message is that for important and quality climate change education, again, you know, we say it often, maybe not often enough, but teachers, you know, where we consistently consider them to be the most important in-school level factor for quality education. So without teacher support, without the tools being provided to them, without the necessary increases in the quality of initial teacher education, followed up by consistent and continuous quality in-service training that includes mentorship that is subject focused, that includes practical skills that teachers can implement in the classroom, that is followed up by monitoring and further evaluation. This is what's going to get teachers there and to address the issues around kindness and changing education systems. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
That's great. A lot of food for thought here, I hope. And I'm going to sneakily use my role as moderator to mention the manifesto for quality climate change education that Education International has agreed on, and which is a kind of proposal and set of demands from the teaching profession around how we can ensure that all students, all schools are delivering, all students have access to quality climate change education, and all schools, all teachers, education support personnel are supported in making that happen. This is in part about public investment in public education systems. It's about ensuring that climate change doesn't hinder children's access to education, as schools are also increasingly hit by the effects of climate change. But it's also about curricula, making sure that climate change is integrated across curricula, across subjects, making sure that it's based on science, but also that it doesn't shy away from all of the non-scientific, but equally important aspects of climate change. So let's look at the ethical, the cultural, the political, the social, the economic dimensions of climate change. Let's recognize how unequally it's been in terms of who got us into this mess and how incredibly unequally we are experiencing it today. That needs to be acknowledged in classrooms across the globe. And the fact that it isn't should be a public outrage. We started off by talking about indigenous knowledge. There's a big piece around that here, making sure that our education systems recognize indigenous forms of knowledge, that it gives it its legitimate space inside formal education systems. And of course, there's a big piece around teachers, making sure that teachers are trained, qualified, supported, making sure that they have the professional autonomy, they have the trust to have those conversations, whether it is about Palestine or about climate justice and how we solve the crisis. And lastly, those of you who are in the room, hopefully also those online, will have seen that the fourth panelist in this session was the climate clock. And the climate clock is ticking fast, reminding us of the absolute urgency to take action. I think the session today was hugely promising in terms of the power in taking that action together, in particular student movements and teacher unions coming together. Tomorrow is the big youth day at COP27, so let's work extra hard tomorrow and remind all the governments here of their obligations and their responsibilities. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for your patience with all the technical challenges and all the funny sound issues that we've had along the way. Thanks everyone, and a big applause to this fabulous panel.